Hey everyone, wherever you are, I hope you're having a wonderful week so far. We have the latest episode of the Inside Crypto Show, interviews and discussions with regular people just like yourselves. Today we're joined by Halborn co-founder and CISO Steven Walbroehl. Before starting Halborn, Steven worked for Fortune 500 companies spanning various sectors including financial services, hospitality, insurance, and much more. That's a very impressive background. We just talked a little bit about comics, but we have to dive into Steven's background before we can talk more about other stuff. Steven, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really happy to be here and talk everything about crypto and comics later on. Yeah, I've been in cybersecurity for over 20 years and started off really doing computer science, and I wanted to make video games and learn how to program them, and eventually landed in cybersecurity somehow. I ended up becoming fascinated with hacking and worked my career up through some banks. Then I was at IBM for a while. And that was my first exposure to doing cybersecurity for like smart contracts at IBM. I also really fell in love with Bitcoin. As I was on the darknet studying what hackers were doing there, I saw this financial asset called Bitcoin that they were using. And when I studied into it, I saw it was a pretty amazing technology like blockchain and distributed ledgers. Like, oh my God, this is going to be big one day. And then I went down the rabbit hole, as people say. And fast forward to today, met my partner and co-founder at Halborn, who's a growth hacker himself, and really provided what we do today, which is cybersecurity solutions for blockchain and emerging technology as well, to help people that are developing smart contracts, whether they're small startups all the way to large corporations that are interested in getting in this. I also wrote 5 books and teach a class for SANS on cybersecurity. It's blockchain and smart contract security is the title of it. And it's a 5-day course that goes over Rust, Solidity, compliance, everything around blockchain security. So that one is brought through SANS, and I teach that too. Really, my life is completely wrapped around all of this stuff here. It's a crazy world, but I love it.
That's amazing. And from chatting with you, I would imagine we're not too different in the age gap, despite my super white hair. But like growing up, I started off in the 80s. I remember my first game was like Rogue back in 1988 or something, like a really basic roguelite game. And then in the 90s, right, even in South Africa, because I'm originally from there, I remember using AOL and AIM. And I remember some of the famous like cybersecurity incidents of the 90s. So I guess my first question to you before we dive into the crypto stuff is like, given your expansive careers, like how has cybersecurity changed over the last 20, 30 years?
Yes, yeah, cybersecurity is extremely important, even during, let's look at business cycles of recessions. There's really no bear market, as you could say, in cybersecurity. And as we become a remote world back in the 90s, at that time, a lot of people are still going to offices and things are much different now. The internet has become like a second home almost for everything. As we become remote and more digital, cybersecurity just becomes even more important than it is today. And we're seeing that because everything is running on the internet. With that comes protection. And if there's new technology, there's going to be vulnerabilities. And when there's vulnerabilities, they're going to be hacked. And that's why cybersecurity is always extremely important and top of mind for all businesses and for people as well.
Okay. I remember a former coworker of mine said, like the banks or banking itself, right, have had hundreds of years to be secure or get to the state of relative, like physical security that they've reached, right? It's impossible for people to say, hey, we should expect crypto to get to that security point. Do you foresee crypto getting more secure in the next decade or so? Or is this still going to be like an uphill fight for cybersecurity experts like yourself and Halborn?
It's a really good question that you have. Cybersecurity is all about risk management, and there's no black and white. There's no being completely secured, and there's always going to be some type of risk involved with anything as technology moves forward. Technology and innovation will never stop. So that means cybersecurity will always have its place as things evolve and develop. I think that with blockchain, right now, it's new technology, and new technology comes with new vulnerabilities, new ways to do it. And what I'm seeing now with my experience in information security and cybersecurity is that we're almost starting fresh, like Web 2 into Web 3. We have all of the same things happening again. There's the same type of adoption and risks that come up. The tools that exist in Web 2 security, like scanners and vulnerability scanning and doing like monitoring, all that doesn't exist yet. Or if it does, it's very limited. So we're starting to build those and develop those. But I think the biggest challenge currently right now that we should get over is really on the user side, awareness, security awareness, and understanding how this is different with it. Having private keys for all of this is much different than giving your keys or the custody to the banks. So there's a lot more security awareness that a user has to know what they're doing and what they're dealing with to remain secured, because when you become the bank, you also have a lot of responsibility to protect your own asset.
It's very true. I mean, and again, like I'm very familiar with Halborn. I think most people in crypto would be familiar with Halborn, but for those who are not, right, like what's your suggestions for risk management? Again, risk management is such a broad term encompassing a lot of different fields, but in terms of cybersecurity, right, you've seen a plethora of things that have happened over the last 15 months, not to mention your career. Like what are bad things people are doing? What should people be doing correctly in cybersecurity?
Yeah, for cybersecurity, for people, if you put them into two general areas, let's say you're developers or businesses involved in this. One is you should have defense in depth, never really rely on one thing. What I see in crypto a lot is the developers, they're almost rushing to get something out because of, I don't know, like FOMO or whatever, there's some type of cycle going on, and they really put security at the end. I think that you should have security baked in and incorporate it into your development processes from the very beginning. So testing code and making sure everything works, and have patience, because you only get one launch. And if that goes wrong, it could leave permanent damage for your project. On the user side, really my suggestion for that is really have awareness, do some research on things. Don't just click on every email that comes in about some great new dog token that comes out, or buy an NFT that you think is cool right away, not really knowing what you're clicking on and getting your keys stolen, because there's a lot more risk that you have. Yeah, we are given great power for self-custody and for financial access with crypto. But with that, there's a lot more fraud involved, and taking advantage of people's really not, when they're not familiar with the space, they could be really exploited in that way. Take your time, do some research on it, understand how this works, what the risk is, because if you have something like a MetaMask wallet or a private key for your Bitcoin on something, a Trezor or Ledger, you have to treat that different than like a password, because it's irrecoverable if you do funds there. And a lot of this is anonymous and unregulated. So there's a lot more risk to the user. So really, it's just understand the risks are and protect yourself from that, and really don't rush into anything blindly, because you may be taken advantage of.
Okay. While you were talking, Stephen, I was thinking of, we had a previous guest who definitely does not have the cybersecurity credentials you have. But one of the things he told me was, right, like one of the core problems in like crypto cybersecurity is the idea of the multi-sig wallet, right? Like he said, when something happens, right, you have to wait for blah, blah to wake up in Poland, and Tom to wake up in the Philippines, and Andy to wake up in Mexico City and stuff. He said, this is a problem, is that crypto companies react too slowly because they're bound by the security of the multi-sig wallet, which is wonderful, but at the same time, it's also a downfall to reacting to situations. What's your thought about that?
Yeah, it's that multi-sig wallets, when you look at it from the time to respond to it, you're absolutely right. There are some misconceptions with multi-sig wallets too. They use it almost as a layer of security. And let's just say that you're a user and that you're investing in something, and they have a multi-sig wallet as their protection, saying, oh, you can't do it. How do you know if it's let's just say a 2 of 3 multi-sig, which means 2 people out of 3 have to sign something for a transaction to go through? How do you know that those 2 signers are not the same person? Like my Firefox browser and my Chrome browser, and I'm just like double signing it, which is a single person. That's a risk there for it, trusting it. So it can be a misconception, and also the reaction time for it to wait for that. Actually, we see that problem. We have a solution that we developed called Seraph. I'm not shilling our products or anything, but it's a way that it's almost a notary, a 24-hour notary that is there to confirm that whatever transactions are happening are expected within range or within bounds, so that we can respond faster and also protect users from that risk of that 2 signers being the same person on a multi-sig. So that's a solution there. It can even be wrapped around a multi-sig, like Gnosis, for example. Like if you're in a company with a multi-sig and somebody has signed, let's say your business partner wants to update it from 2 to 3 signers, it'd be 1 of 3 signers, that could be wrapped in a solution like Seraph to validate that this is an expected change to the smart contract structure of the multi-sig wallets. So that's a couple of misconceptions around there. Multi-sig is not a complete security solution there, but it is one prevention mechanism, because they could also lose the keys too, and you could be locked out from a transaction as well.
Very good point. Tell me more about Seraph. Like the idea of a 24-hour notary is interesting. Is this like a script or an actual person or something? Explain this to some of the laymen who do listen to this podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Seraph is spelled SERAPH.co. That's where our website. So it's based on Ethereum blockchains, EVM-based blockchains. It's actually a smart contract that we developed for on-chain non-custodial security. And a notary can be Halborn itself, or it could be anybody really, a trusted individual. And the way that it works is you have functions within smart contracts. Some of them are very sensitive. Some of them are just normal operations. Within the smart contract, let's say a sensitive function like emergency withdrawal, taking out all the funds from a treasury. That's a very sensitive and high risk function. So we wrap that in a modifier, and the modifier, when that function gets called to withdraw, it will send an event notification to the notary. And when they receive that notification, then they look at the data, they say, okay, why are we withdrawing it? Is this a valid withdrawal? What's the reason for it? Is it hacked or not hacked? When that decision is made, the assigned notary then really approves that data, and then it gets written to chain transparently. So it's something that I don't have to worry about having a key to multi-sign with you, no custody of a key. The notary is just really a wrapper, a modifier that's allowing or not allowing a transaction to go through. So think of it as like a transaction level audit in a way for things, and it baked within the smart contract itself. So that's a layer of protection. I'll give one practical example of smart contract development. Let's say I'm an investor and I just put $10 million into a project that I believe in for a smart contract developer. I could be, as an investor, a notary for that withdrawal to make sure that my funds are not being like rugged out from what I did. Whatever that is called, me as a investor, I get that transaction. It's like, hey, why is my team withdrawing all the funds out? And then I can call them maybe or talk to them. Yeah, we found out we have a vulnerability in our contract. We need to transfer it to a new proxy implementation of this. And like, okay, great, I approve it. And it'll go through. And it's not, hey, I lost my keys. Somebody stole my key and they're trying to withdraw. It's like, oh, deny, and then checks the funds.
Nice. That's a really cool example. And like anyone who's watching or listening to this podcast, like everything I've asked so far is literally none of the questions that are on today's script. And Steven's just being an expert at answering all of these.
I could talk about this all day long and tell you there's so many things to go into. But yeah, we have a lot of plans for Seraph later on, as even allowing people to be a notary themselves. So a trusted notary, they can go through training, understand how to do it, and provide services. So it's opening up a notary marketplace in a way for that.
That is really cool and awesome. And yeah, very interesting. I know lots of people who'll be listening to this will be interested in it. I got to talk about some of the points I was told to talk about today, Steve.
For sure.
Let's jump back on to the Halborn question card. One of the coolest things I found out when we were introduced, right, is like the idea of the Rabies exploit. I'm like, man, I wake up literally every morning here in Taiwan and I check my phone. I'm like, what is the latest crypto news that I missed while I was sleeping for 6-7 hours? And I did not hear anything about it. And I know I asked a bunch of audience before you came on, like, do you guys know what this is? It was like 20% of 40 people that knew what it was. So for the rest of those people, tell us, what is the Rabies exploit and the things you guys published, I think, early in March, I believe.
So the fact that you didn't hear about it, that was a good thing, because we've known about this exploit for almost a year now, and we try to keep it quiet while we we'll let developers fix things here. So Rabies exploit, aptly named, came up with that name because we first found it while testing Dogecoin. And if you know what Rabies is, it's a virus that impacts dogs, makes them rabid, they go crazy, and then they die. Aptly named as a pun, but it's a code exploit that we found in the open source version of Dogecoin at the time last year. We worked with the developers in secret to fix it. And essentially it's one exploit, a couple other minor ones there, that allowed really the chain to run out of memory, like miner by miner, until it was really shut down and vulnerable to 51% attack. And then it was done through like really exhausting memory on certain functions within the code, that in a decentralized network, one miner could shut down another miner through the consensus mechanism until really the chain would be brought down to minimal, obviously impacting things. So anything that was a proof of work system, we found it in Dogecoin. Luckily, we worked with the developers there, Patrick and others, to fix it. And then we looked at other chains. We saw that there was over 200 other proof of work chains based on UTXO that were vulnerable as well, like Litecoin and Zcash and many others that really had the same problem. Anything that was like a fork of Bitcoin. Luckily, Bitcoin was fixed a long time ago, unintentionally, it seems, just based on the normal code. So when we saw that, it was high alert, got together with a lot of the managers and lead developers of these projects to see that it was fixed and patched in kind of a stealth way, as not to draw too much attention before we were ready. Okay, now we can disclose this information to everybody.
Nice. I guess one of the most common questions I got like when looking at this article and sharing it around was like, how does Dogecoin go about finding you? Do they like send you an email, or like how does that work? And how do you go about evaluating something as massive as Dogecoin and finding this vulnerability?
Halborn has some, I say this unbiasedly, the best security researchers here. We have a team of over 100 highly skilled security researchers, engineers, auditors. The way that we were contacted actually wasn't from Dogecoin, it was from Binance.
Oh,
Binance reached out to us and wanted us to review a certain version of Dogecoin, and not even for this vulnerability, it was for others around like the wallet side, so that when they were hosting funds in custody within Binance, because they have Binance an offering there, that the wallets and the nodes were safe. So we worked with Binance on that, testing it and looking at the versions of the open source code. And as a kind of like side thing, we found this vulnerability just through the normal research. And when we saw it, wasn't really in scope for a Binance audit because they were looking for different types of issues, but we couldn't ignore it because we saw this. We went to people to fix this. Us at Halborn, we don't go and put in a pull request to the code to update the code. You don't want to audit or test your own code. Reached out to Patrick. He's one of the main developers, maintainers for Dogecoin. He's one of the best guys I've worked with before. He's really cool, completely understood the risk. And we worked together to test it and make sure the miners on the network were updated past the point of where once you reach over 50% of the miners update their code. The problem with that is if you just put in the patch on the code, there are adversaries that will, what's called like diffing. They'll compare the code of changes to the other one and find what that security flaw is, and then exploit it right away before people get a chance to patch it. Patrick put that fix in along with other normal updates to the code, stealth and put it in. We let some time go in, a few months to get the network updated. Once it was there to a secure state, then it was safe. So we had to keep quiet and not let that leak out as people updated the code.
Okay. Very interesting.
Pretty awesome in the normal world of cybersecurity researchers and the risks involved with the highly confidential, disclosed, embargoed information for some time. Same thing happened with the MetaMask vulnerability we found too.
Wow. Nice. I have a side question I wanted to ask you before. So I listened to a bunch about the tech podcasts, and they were saying it's very hard to find cybersecurity researchers these days. Is that true? Because you mentioned 100 something researchers at Halborn. How do you find these people? Are people studying cybersecurity? Is this easy to find people to come work for you? How does that
Halborn
work?
is very different. We have a very interesting internal culture here at Halborn. You have to hack your way in first. So we have our own code, GitHub repos. They're called CTF, capture the flags. So they will go and one's Rust, one's Solidity, one's Golang. They write a report on the security, pretty much do an audit as their first interview. And then we get the report and then we talk with them. And what we look for isn't really the experience, like how long, what have you done, what college degrees do you have? I look for the ability to learn and the desire to learn and understand and being motivated. So that's like the first challenge is, even if you've never looked at Solidity before, but you took some time, studied it, figured it out, and learned how to do it, that's what's most important to me. And when we have engineers come in here, because I'm a teacher as well, I wrote the 5 books and had that class. We have a great team of engineers that help each other learn, and they're able to really rapidly grow their expertise here at Halborn. We also use a proof of work system internally at Halborn. You get rewarded for the more things you learn, the more things you find, the better you do. So that meritocracy, that really the openness to learning, teamwork, collaboration, and the way that we share information transparently is what sets us apart, and the engineers here, why they are so skilled. So I think we attract the right type of mindset, really, not the right experience.
Okay, very nice. Zoom back out again, Steven, is thinking about security. And another comment I looked at, I think while I was preparing for this podcast, was like, one of the reasons crypto has faced so many security issues is that it's open, right? Everything's in the blockchain, it's transparent, and people looking inward at crypto, this is the advantage of centralization, right? Is that it is safer, it is more secure. Do you think crypto would be safer if we were more central?
I think that it's the trade-off of centralization versus decentralization. Each side has its benefits and risks. When it comes to open source is different than decentralized or centralized. You can have something centralized that's also open source. So with open source code, I actually think it's more secure, because maybe I'm optimistic, but I tend to think that there's more good guys than bad guys out there. And you're able to spot flaws, vulnerabilities faster in an open source network. Whereas if it was closed source, things like, let's say Windows code is closed source. And there's something called Patch Tuesday. Almost all the time, there's updates to Windows fixing flaws that are found. And there's always a risk of a systemic vulnerability that is a closed source. And then after so long, so many systems are integrated with it, now there's an exploit. It impacts way more. You can have a systemic failure. We've seen that before with big things like Heartbleed and issues that are really critical impact to infrastructure. I think open source, you're able to find those things and fix them earlier and faster. And then that will also make the entire ecosystem of code more secure in the end, because you're really you're crowdsourcing the fixes rather than relying on a team of internal researchers at like Microsoft, for example, for the Windows. While there are some like risks of an adversary seeing the code vulnerabilities, taking advantage of it right away, I think in the long term, it ends up being much more robust and secure in the end.
Okay. I mean, speaking of open sources, I'm thinking back to the sort of LastPass password manager incident. One of the DevOps guys had like a compromised Plexus server at home, and people always wonder, I think it's one of the most common questions we've gotten in cryptos. Yeah, I have my ledger, my Trezor, which you mentioned earlier. As somebody who's seen a role, like for regular crypto people using MetaMask, using Ledger, storing their crypto, given what you've seen, what are some tips that you can suggest to people like keep safe crypto?
Yeah, I think that Ledger, Trezor, hardware, cold storage, key custody that you have, that's what crypto is all about. When you have centralized crypto, like, in exchanges, there's absolutely nothing wrong for them as an on-ramp, because nobody's going to mine their own Bitcoin right now. It's really hard to do. On-ramp to get it is great, but it all depends on what are you using it for. If it's to hold on to as an investor for the long term, for sure, put it on a Ledger, a hardware wallet, and cold storage. If you're buying and selling, trading, if you're getting NFTs, I think the best solution is having like a warm wallet, something like a MetaMask or Ledger Trezor software, where you attach that to your hardware wallet. So that's the best practice to protect a user from key theft locally on your device. However, the thing you have to know is the Ledger and Trezor are only going to protect like digitally the key as it touches your computer or your access point. That's all goes out the window if you lose the 12 or 24 word phrase that is used to create that key on the Ledger and Trezor. And if you lose that, and then like you lose your Trezor or Ledger, then you're toast. You like rugged yourself that way. So that's the ultimate protection, is that phrase. You don't need a Trezor or Ledger at all. All you need is the BIP standard, BIP 32 and 39 standard to recreate your private key. And that's just comes down to the 12 to 24 words. So if you expose that, somebody finds your little sheet, if somebody copies that from your OneNote or Apple Notes page somehow, or you lose it yourself, then that is, all of it can be lost. So you have to protect that phrase. That's your key. It's kind of like you can even make a brain wallet, not have a Trezor Ledger at all. But that's the one thing you have to know, is you're only protected as long as that key is protected.
Very true. And I totally agree with that, Stephen. I've got to ask this question as well, is because while I started in crypto in 2017, mining as a typical computer geek who likes playing games, right? You have loads of extra GPUs lying around after 30 years or so. Getting into crypto and working in crypto, one of the things you noticed, you're going to different protocols, audits by Halborn, audits by Certic, audits by XYZ company, PeckShield, whoever you want to call it, right? These are all names. People always ask me, what are the point of audits? Like you have the audit on the website and you're like, okay, and then 6 months later, I'm not going to name names, this protocol was hacked or that protocol was hacked, but then people are like, but we were audited in the Discord or we were audited in the Telegram, right? I know the reason for why we need audits, but I know a lot of our audience were like, audits are supposed to be foolproof.
There's two things about this comment. One is, I'll start with the auditor's side of it all. There's no such thing as guarantee of security 100% on an audit. Audits, it's an art. And you can do formal verification type of audits, and that arrives to mathematical probability that it's impossible to take advantage of. It's never foolproof because as if you look at it from a perspective of a human doing the auditing, things can be missed no matter how far. And also new exploits can come out post-audit that really weren't researched before or found. Now, also, there's some risks that are not technical. Security is a risk assessment. And if this happened to Halborn before, we found auditing the code, that emergency withdrawal function again. Hey, do you know that there's a function here that can take all the money out from it? Yeah, that's part of the code. It's expected functionality. We're like, okay, what do you do in that situation? Do you say that you can't release the code? No, that's not our decision too. They accept that risk and they put it out there. And then they lose the key or it gets insider compromise and there's a rug pull. Is that our fault? We found that risk and we told the developers of that. It's on the report. If users look at the audit report and understand it, they'll know, okay, that's the risk. There's some way somebody can take out all the money from this here. So sometimes the risks are accepted by developers or projects, and then that accepted risk gets compromised or exploited. So that's one aspect of that, is that balance. And that's why you can look at the audits and you really have to understand, like, an audit doesn't mean it's always secure. We have on our audit report risk levels that are either mitigated or accepted. And then sometimes just things are missed because of the change, or you could audit something forever if you really wanted to. It's all about the time and amount of attention that auditor would give to it. The second thing around this is we see this a lot. Code changes all the time, and audits, one line of code or one change in the code can be the difference between vulnerable and not vulnerable. And it has to be a consistent practice to audit whenever there are changes in the code or smart contract or project code of mainnet. So if they get the audit, it goes public, and then they update their smart contract 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, it's almost completely different code, different logic. It has to be re-audited in order to test that. And a lot of projects don't do that. They get audit one time, they think they're secure forever. And then people blame the auditor saying they missed it. They didn't re-audit all those changes since then. And yeah, it was safe before, it's not safe any longer. So this is why developers have to come back and consistently be diligent in their security. The way we do our business with people is we form partnerships and provide continuous security auditing with the relationship, because we know the code just as much as developers now. We've already seen it before, and we'll know the changes and what did change and how it works. So it could be done faster, quicker, and better quality. So that's my long answer of saying that, really, to sum it up. One, no guarantee of security ever. Sometimes developers accept risk, and sometimes things are just missed. And then two, code changes quite often. And when it does, they have to re-secure it. Otherwise, the previous audit is invalid.
And you just mentioned some really good points for old people like me, right? Who go up reading PC Magazine and stuff and reading about Windows security issues and how Windows codes change, and Microsoft, yeah, we don't need to do that. It's okay. Don't worry. We won't tell you about this until something bad happens. And the same thing applies to crypto companies, right? As the code base does change and you're supposed to get things rechecked for the safety of your users, especially as you mentioned earlier in this podcast, if you are handling people's money. But yeah, anyway, I'm not going to rant about this at all at the moment. So
yeah, it's like for Windows or Apple's, if let's say you're Apple, the iPhone 1, generation 1 had an audit, and then they never audited it again, and we're on iPhone 14. Exactly. And then iPhone 14 gets hacked. They're going to say, oh, the auditor missed it. It's like, we audited iPhone 1.
That is the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Okay. As a former teacher, I know protecting your voice is super important, and you do have a town hall in a bit. Before we end up today's podcast, I'd like to leave you the floor. We've talked about so many cool things, and this is, I think you'll be episode 141. In 140 episodes, this is my favorite security episode we've had. You're
really
an awesome guest. Thank you. So yeah, the floor is yours. Anything you want to say about Halborn or Seraph or any of your products or things upcoming or articles,
yeah, for
take
sure.
as much time as you want and go for it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not too much of a salesperson, so I'm not going to shill everything here. I'll just in general say that I absolutely love this technology. I think that we're all changing the world here. I've never seen innovation happen so fast. And providing security, what Halborn does, it's not just a company that's doing it for any financial gain or because it's an opportunity. We all here really believe in this technology and what it can do for the world, not just financially, but with things like NFTs, with having self-custody, the rapid global way to transact with each other transparently. We want to see it succeed. And that's why Halborn is here, is to help the security side of that so that people can trust it more and adopt it more. There's a lot of really great things coming. Really, I'm happy to see with all the bank crises going on, Bitcoin is doing what it's supposed to do and provide an alternative investment and safety here. So it's great, kind of acting as digital gold. I think gold is even at an all-time high right now too. Not to say I want bank crisis to happen. It's not, that's not true at all either, but we have options here and it's showing what it's supposed to do. For the future of Halborn, we're a cybersecurity company first, and blockchain is one aspect of it, but we're here for emerging technology. We just started doing gaming security recently.
Right.
Yeah, we have a partnership with 𝕋𝕚𝕞𝕖 brands and also Yuga Labs, which is blockchain gaming. And we're moving into working with other partners too, just online gambling and doing like metaverse and all these other things. So we're diversifying there. Also looking into IoT security and maybe AI security as that GPT stuff is coming out. So yeah, we're providing security for all the emerging technology and solutions and products for that with our team. Really exciting things coming here and happy to help the world by fixing one vulnerability at a time.
Thank you. And I appreciate that is like the perfect little snippet to end off today's show on. And I'd like to mention as well is like, I follow your head of marketing on LinkedIn. We know each other through a friend of a friend. And like, she's always posting stuff about Halborn on LinkedIn. So that's a really cool place as a professional person. If you'd like to follow you guys, I'll have all of that down in the show notes. Steven, I know you're on LinkedIn as well, so I'll put your LinkedIn down there. Are you on Twitter at all for people to follow you, or would you like to share that?
At Twitter is
Halborn Steve. Cool. I will include that in the show notes as well. Thank you very much for your time and this awesome podcast.
Great. Happy talking about it.
Yeah, it was
Pleasure.
so fun. And hopefully we can talk more about gaming security or maybe do that comic book podcast at some point in the future. Thanks a lot, Steven. Good luck with your town hall and we'll chat later.